Welcome to Doing, Being, Thinking, dialectical behavior therapy skills for making a life worth living. I'm your host, Eric Nykamp, a therapist and clinical director at the Grand Rapids campus of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services, a mental health practice with campuses throughout the great state of Michigan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doing, Being, Thinking, a podcast exploring the what, when, and how of using dialectical behavior therapy skills for making a life worth living. My name's Eric. I'm a DBT therapist and one of the clinical directors at Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the goals of skills training. And joining me today is my friend Selena, who is one of the other DBT therapists and clinical directors here at AFBHS. Hey, Selena.
Hello.
So the first question that we should probably talk about is, what are the goals of skills training? Like, what's it for? Why do we do this?
So our general goal for our DBT skills training is to learn how to change our own behaviors, emotions, and thoughts that are linked to problems in living and are causing misery and distress in our everyday life. Help us get unstuck.
I like that language of getting unstuck. I know that for myself, there are these moments where I can feel myself reacting to things in really habitual ways. And I don't think that my brain is any different from anybody else's brain, that sometimes I do things over and over and over again in ways that if I look back on it, I think, if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't end up in the same place over and over where I feel like I'm in a jam.
It's one of those things, like we're older now.
So yes, we are. You and I both are.
Yes. So we've done it a certain way for so long that our brain just automatically does it now. So now we need to have that goal of, we need to check ourselves so we don't get stuck in that same pattern and trying to figure out why it doesn't work when it didn't work the first 100 times.
So, let's talk a minute about when we do goal setting in DBT, because that's a really important thing. It's right in the front of the DBT manual. And let's talk a little bit about when we use this page. So when do you use it with clients?
Well, for me, it's like definitely, I want to say probably about third session, honestly, like what we call the pre-treatment, which is the sessions before we kind of really jump into DBT, because we need to know our goals. Like, if we're going to jump into and do the full model DBT, which can be quite intensive, what are your goals? We need to set those goals for us so we know what we're working towards. So it's for me, when I work with my clients, it's up front and in the beginning.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, same for me. I kind of think of it almost like onboarding. If you start a new job and you're kind of like getting some introductory training so that you can do the work you want to do. And I see pre-treatment kind of like that, where you're trying to see, are you a fit for this therapy? And as part of that fit, it's a good idea to, at least on the front end, set some goals about, this is what I want to work on. It's both what keeps me stuck, what am I doing that keeps me stuck? And starting to imagine, what are some things that I might want to learn that could get me unstuck so that I can live this life that I want to live.
It's one of those things all therapy, we like to talk about goals, right? But it's truthfully, where do you see yourself? Like, what are you doing right now that you don't like, that you want to change? Yeah. And that's our goals. Like, yes, we use the big word goals, right? Because that word can kind of be scary sometimes. But it really is just, what are the things you want to change? What do you want to work on?
Yeah. I was sitting with someone the other day and we were talking about this very thing. And we had just gone over like, what are the symptoms of borderline personality disorder? And they could kind of identify, okay, you get all these different characteristics, and most people don't hit all of them, but they hit enough of them that you can have the diagnosis. And so after they identified, these are the things that I'm doing, and there's even some tiers with it because it's some pretty strong stuff. Sometimes it's like, wow, my relationships are very unstable. It's a hard thing to admit to a stranger that you've just met for, 3 hours. And to sit down then and say, these are my symptoms, and this is what I'm doing that's keeping me stuck, or that's making me miserable, or that's causing me to suffer.
And
And I feel,
sometimes, oh,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go right
No, I
ahead.
was just going to say, sometimes you may not know.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, because we go through so many things that you'll be like, oh, yeah, that's it. Oh, yeah, that's it. That
Mhm.
that one right there. So it helps to have a DBT clinician walk you through that goal setting, because we really dive into like different ways of where that stuckness, I don't think that's a word, but it is
It's a,
right now.
that should be a word. That
It
should
should be
definitely
a
be a year.
word. But yeah, we walk through trying to figure out where people are stuck. And we
Well,
do that through looking at goals.
absolutely. And even as clinicians, so we as DBT clinicians do DBT with one another. And even as a therapist, it's like, okay, well, what are your goals for yourself as a therapist this year? Where are you getting stuck? What could you imagine would help you get unstuck? I was talking with some folks today, and we were talking about like, where are these areas where we're growing? And one of them that came up was like setting limits. And
That's a
how do we
hard one.
talk to ourselves when we're setting limits with somebody? And, for myself, I said, like, a lot of times I can hear the little critic in my mind tell me that I'm being mean when I'm setting limits with people. Like, oh, you're going to hurt their feelings. They're going to be disappointed, or maybe they'll be frustrated because you're saying, well, you can't do anything you want in here. There's certain ways of behaving there. Like, we ask you to like show up on time and, conduct yourself in such a way during the sessions. And then we were talking about, well, if we don't set the limits, are we creating a condition that, actually fosters the kind of behavior that we don't want to see? And I would never treat my dog like that, where I'm like, well, you can just poop anywhere you want in the house. Like, I trained my dog over months and months and months to let me know when he needs to go outside. And sometimes it's that same kind of thing where it's like, nope, there's certain kinds of behavior that's okay and certain kinds of behavior that's not. And those were some of our goals that we had talked about. Like, okay, what would it mean to help us be unstuck as therapists when it comes to setting limits?
That's a good way to look at it too, is it not only helps us know what we want to work towards, but what we are trying to avoid
Yeah.
or decrease. Because sometimes there's stuff that we want to just not do as much of.
Right.
So it kind of, the goals will help us direct us either way. Like, what do we want to have more in our life of, and what do we want to have less in our life of? And if you do DBT therapy, you'll hear us always say, well, is that with your goals? What is your
Yes.
goal? Because we do come back to goals all the time.
A lot.
Is that your goal? Let's look back at that page. What was your goal?
So let's actually talk a little bit about how we set goals in DBT. And I'll start here with something that I've found really helpful. And DBT clinicians have a lot of freedom to do DBT in lots of different ways. So if you hear Selena and I talking about ways we use it, you don't have to read that as like, this is the only way to do it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do with people. I have no idea what you're going to say, Selena, but this is something that I'll do. So I'll sit down with people and say, 3 times a year, we're going to look at this page. And I kind of think of it like, well, January, sometimes people are like setting New Year's resolutions. So we do it then. I do it in May because where we live in Michigan, it's starting to get warm and people start thinking about, oh, these things that I want to do for the summer, or it's going to be nice to have a break from the school year and I want to do something to help myself during this period. And then in September, when a lot of things are starting up, I'll do it with people then. And what I find really helpful is on this page in the DBT manual, it says behaviors to decrease and skills to increase. And there's this list of words about behaviors to decrease. Because sometimes, honestly, if someone asks me, like, what do you want to do less of in your life? What's keeping you stuck? I might just think, well, I'm stuck. I can't think of what I'm doing that's keeping me stuck. But this really helpful word list, I can look at a list of words and that'll jog my memory. So I'll ask people, hey, circle the words that you say, like, okay, that applies to my life right now. And then
I
write
feel
three
like you are in my
sentences.
sessions because I do the exact same thing.
You do the same thing? Okay, how do you use it?
Same like you were saying, like we go through each. So there's on the page that we're talking about in the DBT manual, there's 5 sections of behaviors
Yes.
to decrease. And I'll have them go through each section and be like, circle the ones that you think are affecting or impacting you or keeping you from either a relationship that you want or being your best self. And they'll go through and circle them, just like you were saying.
And the word list is pretty broad. So, I mean, I'll read just a few of them just so you kind of get a taste if you haven't gotten this book before. It's things like mindlessness, emptiness, being out of touch with yourself and others, or judgmentalness, or things like not getting along with other people, like lots of conflict, or feeling lonely, having a hard time with change, having emotions that are going up and down, acting without thinking, being impulsive, willfulness, having a hard time accepting things. And there's some other words on here too, but it's super interesting for me when I sit down with people and doing it a few times a year, where sometimes the same word shows up over and over and over. And other words kind of like they're there for a little while, and then people will look up at me and they'll be like, I can tell I'm changing with this.
Yes.
Like my friend or my partner or my spouse says, like, wow, we're not fighting as much anymore. And then maybe like that one will change, but then they'll be like, you know what really the deal is that, like, I'm willful, I'm really stubborn. Like that one lingers around, or I'm really judgmental. And like, once I kind of get my emotions from swinging all over the place, like, that little critical voice in my head, like, I cannot get that thing to shut up. And maybe that's the deeper work.
I'll say those 2 are the ones that I have noticed, tend to show up quite often and tend to be the ones that stay the longest.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? What do you think are ones that people circle early in treatment?
Early is those difficulties in regulating their emotions.
Yeah.
Where's the other one? Being out of touch with self and others. I find that one to be one that's usually at the beginning.
Yep.
One that is not on here that people usually will add is just not knowing what their emotion is.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, actually.
Yeah, so like a lot of people will be like, I'm just numb. Like, okay, well
Yes.
that usually doesn't really mean what you think it means. It means that you probably have too many emotions and you just don't know which one to pick first. So that's usually one that we'll add in there at the beginning, and then that one usually falls off pretty quickly. What other ones? Do you have other ones that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also hear people sometimes talking about their impulsive behavior, and that can be all sorts of different things. That can be code for all sorts of different things.
Mhm.
Could be things like self-harm. It could be things though like yelling at people or like hitting things, driving too fast. Like a lot of times it functions as this tension release kind of mechanism. And it's like, oh, when I have this release, I also experience regret.
Mhm.
And so sometimes
Yes.
I'll talk with people about what are the rewards and what are the regrets as a way to kind of think about it because there's a reason you're doing it that's rewarding. You know, when I pound my fist on the countertop, like everybody knows that I really mean what I'm saying. You know, but then the regret is, wow, everybody got really scared too, and then they don't want to
Yes.
be by me, you know, or whatever the thing is. And to in some ways have some compassion for that dilemma that I don't know another way to solve this problem right now or to express how I'm feeling right now in a way that people seem to give me what I want or understand what I'm trying to say. And I always find it to be like this very humbling moment in therapy where it can get
Yes.
very quiet.
Yeah, because, and like I said, this is, like we said earlier, this is like third session meeting us.
Yes.
And we're asking like these really big, like, what are these behaviors you've done for so long? Like, we're asking you to be open with us about all these things that have kept you stuck. And that can be very, very, very hard. Not can be, is,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially
Because
with somebody that you're on, what, hour 4 of ever talking to in your entire life.
So after people kind of do this moment where sometimes there's like feelings like shame or regret that come up, then we talk about skills to increase. And the skills to increase are the 4 modules that then we'll be teaching in skills groups. Mindfulness skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills, which are like people skills, emotion regulation, like how do I keep myself level, and distress tolerance, about how do I handle times where I'm freaking out. And those skills are related, but also in some ways very distinct because of the function that they play. And sometimes I'll see people not really know what they should put down. And so early in treatment, they might make a guess about, okay, well, this is what I think I should do.
Mhm.
And in DBT, we'll teach what you could do.
I see they do a lot because what I would do when I read through those skills to increase is I'll actually like um already, which granted they don't know the skills yet, because that's what the rest of DBT is for. But I will say like, oh, you are having difficulty identifying your emotions. So in our mindfulness skills, you will learn mindfulness of emotions and be able to identify. So like I'll hook them with some skills, and that's usually what I when they get to go down to that skills to increase section, it's usually, well, you just told me that's what I'm gonna do. So that's what I'm gonna put. I'm like, well, I mean,
You're
it's true. You are gonna do that.
you're a good skills coach. Yeah, I bet that's very helpful. Actually, I might try that myself now.
Ah, copyright it. You owe me every time you use it.
Okay. So, what might get in the way of setting goals, especially at this point in treatment?
Lots of things.
Yes.
Like we said before, you are just meeting us and we're asking you to open up all these things. So, just that therapeutic relationship can be one.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not comfortable yet, which is totally fine and understandable. Um, Another one can be like maybe addiction. That can be one. Um, Maybe you're just not ready to change. Maybe you thought you were, and we get in here, we work on this, and you're like, whoa, this seems too intense for me. So maybe it's just like maybe that's not where you're at right now, and that's okay too. We'll work on some other, well, we can work on other things. Um, what else? What else? What are some of your thoughts?
I'm thinking, I know I'm the one that asked the question. Um, One of the things that I've noticed lately, and maybe it's just that I'm starting to observe it more, but sometimes coming into a session with really intense emotion, as a therapist, I feel myself kind of torn between if we set these goals, that's going to be really helpful for guiding us forward and dealing with what's happening right now in the room. Whether it's tears, whether it's anger. Um, I think sometimes it's because DBT is such a different kind of therapy where there's so much teaching and coaching that's involved that if you're coming in thinking therapy is the time that in the first 20 to 30 minutes, just unload a whole long story about everything that's gone wrong in the last week or in my life altogether, and just urgency to get that story out. I can see that sometimes competing with let's think about your life in general in the big picture so that we can figure out what to do differently.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, and other barriers to DBT and these setting your own goals are just like the same barriers we have in everyday life. Like everyday life happens.
Yes.
Things happen to us. So I'm like, that might get in the way. Like you might come in and go, I know we were supposed to set goals today, but this happened. Somebody passed away, or
Yes.
I got into this big argument with my partner, or, I got into a car accident and now I'm really scared about driving. So things happen. So sometimes that and it's life in itself can be a barrier sometimes that we need to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point because there's a lot of folks that part of the reason that they're even in DBT to start with is because life has a lot of those really startling or difficult hardships that kind of come at a pretty fast rate. And so it's not that people are like bringing it up as a way to derail things, but that's what life has been like for so long that you're just getting a snapshot of like, this is what my normal life looks like. And it does feel like there's way too much going on.
Very much so. Chaos. That's
Yeah.
generally a lot. I don't know about you with your clients, but my clients, when they're coming into DBT, I often hear that word a lot, that my life is chaos.
Yeah.
My mind is chaos. And so it's hard. It's like, how do I do this? How do I set this goal when there's so much chaos going in my head?
Yeah. In another episode, we'll talk about like the house of DBT model, which is sort of like this metaphor for a house with a couple stories and a roof, and each level of DBT is for something different. But they kind of talk about the first stage is like your house is on fire
Mhm.
and life feels like hell, and you're just trying to figure out how to get out. And I think that's pretty accurate.
Another barrier is just you don't know skills yet. You don't know
Absolutely not.
DBT yet. So it's like,
Yes.
and if you're just coming in, well, even if you're not just coming in, like maybe it's your first therapy, um, that comes with different barriers or if you've been in therapy for 20 years, you bring that with you too. So that can bring different barriers. So there's
Yeah.
all kinds of barriers that can be there. We just gotta uh try to figure out the best way to work through them.
And I think that's actually pretty normal to have some barriers.
Oh yes.
I mean, I think for myself, like, okay, so I'm a straight white guy. And there's a whole lot of people when they're imagining, like, oh, I get to talk to a therapist, they're not imagining somebody like me. And so, you know, like if I meet them at the door, that might take a little getting used to. Like if you're kind of like, well, I was really hoping that I could talk to, someone who's a person of color. I wish I could talk to someone who's a woman, or you know,
Mhm.
I'd like someone that's a member of the LGBTQ community. Like if you're looking for that and you get me, that could take some adjustment and deciding like, am I on board for this or not? And those conversations might need to be had.
And the different personalities, because
Yeah.
I definitely have a different personality in the way I do treatment with some of the other clinicians, and how they do their treatment. It's neither is right, neither is wrong, and both can be absolutely phenomenal. But it just depends on what you mesh with.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up with a little conversation about how does setting goals help us make a life worth living? I mean, one of the things that comes to mind for me, and we can talk about this skill in another episode, but there's this skill called effectiveness. To think about, are you being effective? And it sort of implies that you know what your goals are. Because sometimes in the heat of the moment, all that stuff can go out the window.
Very easily.
And to just think a minute about like, well, what is my goal? What has kept me stuck for so long? Let's imagine it's a relationship issue that like maybe you can manage your anger at work, but oh my gosh, at home with the people closest to you, like that's when you're more likely to unload. And if you write down on your page, the thing I want to focus on in the next year of therapy is improving my interpersonal relationships. If you're able to catch yourself in that moment and remember, this is my goal. I am paying X amount of dollars every week to go to therapy to work on this, or whatever the thing is that you have to think, to remember that that's your goal and to spend the next 52 weeks of the year having a conversation at least once a week about how are you working towards this. Eventually, it will stick and you will get
Eventually, yes.
somewhere because it's starting to stick.
Yes.
But
Our brain
it
likes
can't.
the repetitiveness.
It cannot be a focus if you don't write it down. You cannot change what you don't notice.
Another way that, just piggybacking right off of what you said, is if you write that down and you know that interpersonal is your goal, when you go through the DBT skills, you're going to pay attention more to that skill section when we go through that module. You're going to be like, oh, yep, remember when I did my goals, this was where I said I wanted to increase these goals right here, these skills. And so then you're going to pay attention more to, and then retain more and take away more from that module, because you can remember that that was your goal.
Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of like building a life worth living, this is the roadmap. I mean, this is like when you're putting the address in your GPS and you know, like, I want to get here. And there's going to be all these twists and turns to get there. And occasionally there's going to be roads that are shut down, or you're going to find out that like maybe you're having car problems and you have to pull over and check things. And then you get back on the road again. But
It's Michigan
eventually,
and you hit a pothole.
yeah, eventually you're going to get there. You can't aim for something if you don't have a target. Then you're just shooting arrows.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, like, how do you know what you want?
And you can change what you want sometimes, but to think about your life in general, what are you doing over and over that's making it hard? And how can you stop it and replace it with something else that's more effective? That's how you make your life worth living.
I like that. I like goals as the roadmap to where you want to get to.
Yeah.
It's your end destination. And DBT is your path to get there. Like, it's your car.
I mean, that's the thing. I don't know if you feel like this, but people come into my office and I'm seeing a lot of people that are stuck and they've been stuck for a long time. And sometimes the consequences of being stuck have gotten to the point that they're like, I don't know if I can lose anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stuff that's lost, maybe some of it comes back, maybe some of it doesn't. But what does the future look like? Do I want my future to have the same level of loss over and over and over? And that's what we're working on. Like, what is the future going to be? And to imagine the future you want so that you can work towards it, that's a wonderful, beautiful thing.
Yes, because a lot of people, when they come to us for DBT, they're in that basement layer of our house is on fire, life in chaos. And these goals will help us, like, how do you see your future, and how do you see your life worth living?
Yeah.
And these goals give us that direction to climb up the stairs and climb out of the basement.
Yeah. I've
Take
had
back
people
control sometimes, because that's part of it too, is taking back control of our own thoughts and our feelings and the emotions and our behaviors.
Yeah. I've had people tell me things like, originally my goal was trying to save my marriage or trying to stay in school or learning how to be a better parent or whatever it is. And then sometimes there's some things that happen along the way. Like, well, I couldn't save my marriage. But what I got instead was that I found out that I could be happy. Or that I thought this thing was going to destroy me. And I found out that it didn't. Or that it
Get that
wouldn't.
one a lot.
Or that I can cope with it better. You know, I
I'm
used to only
strong
be
enough
able,
to do this.
yeah, I used to only be able to cope by, by drinking or using pot. And now I realize, like, oh, I can do something else. I don't have to numb in order to cope. I can actually cope.
My feelings are all horrible monsters that are out to get me.
Yeah.
And I'm strong enough to handle them.
I hope this episode helps you understand a little bit more about setting goals in DBT. And while it can take a lifetime to master any skill, with practice, it's going to get progressively easier over time. We hope that all of you continue doing, being, and thinking in wise ways on your way to making a life worth living. Until next time, see ya. Thanks for listening. Doing, Being, Thinking is an educational podcast about dialectical behavior therapy and is not intended as a substitute for therapy. This is a podcast outreach of Adolescent and Family Behavioral Health Services, offering both in-person and telehealth therapy to children, teens, and adults throughout Michigan. If you are a Michigan resident and want to get started with therapy, including DBT, children's DBT, or other evidence-based therapies, please contact us at 616-719-0194 or find us on the web at www.adolescentfamilybhs.com.